everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is First Amendment attorney Jeff Lewis. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited for you to make sense of this news because the story really begins 10 years ago. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage was legal in the United States. Now, 10 years later, a case was filed in July asking the court to overturn this landmark ruling. So to start off the conversations, can you fill in the gaps for us here? How did we get here a decade later?
Right. Now, 10 years ago, the court ruled that there was a constitutional right for same-sex marriages, compelling every state and county employee to issue a marriage license when a same-sex couple applied for a marriage license. And this case that's in the news today is about a county clerk who refused to issue a marriage license in a same-sex case and was sued civilly, and she wants to challenge the resulting judgment from that case.
That county clerk you mentioned is Kim Davis, and she is the person behind this case. If we can remember, she's a former county clerk from Kentucky who briefly wound up in jail back in 2015 because she refused to issue same-sex couples marriage certificates. And her asking the court to overturn Obergefell comes as part of a lawsuit that says she was discriminated against for refusing to issue these licenses to same-sex couples. So essentially, is this a case within a case?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, her primary legal challenge, which has been rejected below and rejected in the intermediate court, which is up before the Supreme Court now, is does a civil litigant like her, a civil defendant in a private lawsuit, have a First Amendment defense based on the free exercise of religion provision of the First Amendment? Does she have a defense to say, I can't be held liable in monetary damages for refusing to issue a certificate? That's the procedural posture of this case, and it's very, very unusual.
And she said that signing those certificates would violate her religious beliefs. She's citing the First Amendment, saying that that's protected. In the eyes of the law, how strong is her argument?
It's not a great argument. Most commentators don't think she's going to get far with this cert petition. In the intermediate court, there was no real enthusiasm for her petition. But I will say this: at least one justice, I believe, has voted to require that the other side in her dispute weigh in with a response to the cert petition. So we know at least one U.S. Supreme Court justice is interested in maybe hearing a little bit more about this dispute.
I do want to talk about the justices because back in 2022, in a concurring opinion on the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe, Justice Clarence Thomas said that the court should reconsider Obergefell, which legalized same-sex marriages nationwide, since both rulings are based on the same legal argument. So does that indicate anything to you about whether or not the court will even hear this case?
Well, it takes 4 justices to vote to hear a case. And that was by Justice Thomas, the comment you just read. And I'm certain he would vote. So he'd be one of the 4. So the real question is, are there 3 other justices who would take the case? And then is there a majority? Are there 5 justices who would be willing to directly take on the Obergefell decision? I don't think there are 5 justices, but who knows?
Do you think then there are 4 justices to hear this case even?
It's possible. I will say this. The procedural posture of this case is odd. It's not somebody who's seeking a marriage license or directly affected. It's a civil litigant who was hit with a big damages award and wants to raise an obscure point of law about a First Amendment defense. I'm not sure this is the case that the U.S. Supreme Court wants to use as the vehicle for overturning a 10-year-old precedent.
And do you think if it's not this case that there is a separate vehicle, a different vehicle for the Supreme Court to overturn gay marriage in the United States?
There could be other cases with a more frontal, direct challenge to the due process basis or analysis that the Supreme Court used to enact or validate same-sex marriages. In this case, the record is real poor, and you don't have a very good optics in terms of this defendant who was held liable by a jury for 6 figures in damages. I just don't think the Supreme Court's going to take this case, but there could be cases where somebody has a more direct interest in marriage or refusing marriage, and I could see the Supreme Court revisiting this precedent.
And how much, in your opinion, does optics matter when the Supreme Court is taking up a case? Because based on polling in recent years, it doesn't seem like there's much national appetite for the Supreme Court to overturn gay marriage.
Yeah, I don't think optics matter. And it used to be before Dobbs, the institution matter, meaning even if justices felt like Wade was wrongly decided, because of the institutional and longstanding history of Roe v. Wade, they weren't willing, they didn't have a collective willingness to challenge that direct precedent. But that institutionalism is not something you see a whole lot of in today's Supreme Court. And so you could see five justices who are willing to overturn a decision that's only 10 years old. And they might be thinking that now's the time to do it, depending on who's president next. Maybe the conservative leanings of this court are not going to be around forever.
And Hillary Clinton recently predicted that the Supreme Court, quote, will do to gay marriage what they did to abortion. They will send it back to the states. Do you think that's the avenue that the Supreme Court would take?
Well, let me just say this. They could grant this cert petition and give Ms. Davis what she needs without actually directly overturning Obergefell. So keep that in mind. But yeah, if they did overturn their prior decision from 10 years ago, it would return to the states. But Congress did pass a law that says each state has to respect the marriage licenses issued by other states. So it's not the complete end of same-sex marriage if the Supreme Court takes this action.
Exactly. That passed, I believe, back in 2022, and it enshrines the right marriage equality. I mean, how much does that matter here when it comes to the Supreme Court? Because even if the Supreme Court overturns Obergefell, then what happens?
Right. So it provides a floor, if you will, a minimum guarantee for those people who are living in states that allow same-sex marriages, that they could continue to seek such licenses. And that if they travel or move to a different state that doesn't allow for such marriages, that at least the certificates issued by a state that allows these marriages would be respected. So there is some floor, some minimum guarantees allowed for people who have obtained such licenses, but it leaves a lot of people out in the dark if they want to live in a state that doesn't allow gay same-sex marriages.
And the Supreme Court hasn't acted yet, but I think there's two big questions. One, will they hear this case? Two, will the Supreme Court overturn same-sex marriage? And I think based on the conversation, you think, one, they could hear this case. Two, you might have a tougher time overturning that in this Supreme Court. I mean, am I characterizing that correctly?
Right. If there's four votes to take the case up, they'll then have to decide what questions they're going to take up. Will it be the more narrow question of should the civil litigant have an affirmative defense in a civil lawsuit for damages, which is very different than is same-sex marriage legal? Or they could take the broader question and do a frontal assault and take on the question and directly reverse this 10-year-old precedent.
And what specifically are you looking at for next?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the amicus parties line up in terms of which parties file amicus briefs. It'll be interesting to see how long this sits in conference in terms of how long it takes the Supreme Court to review this. And it'll also be interesting to see if there's other petitions that are filed that more directly, let's just say, present a more attractive vehicle for the Supreme Court to do what it wants to do here.
Well, Jeff, there's certainly a lot to look out for. And as we see this develop, as we see, even if the Supreme Court hears this case, I hope you can come back on and break it down with me. Thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Of course. Thanks for having me.